You said go live.
Go live. Now you're live.
Now I lost my edge. Okay. Welcome everybody to Theology on Tap. My name is, wait for it, you ready for this one? The Reverend Dr.
Yes.
Evan Jolie.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Freshly minted.
Freshly, yes. So is that new doctorate smell. I am the Associate Minister of Family Life at First Christian Church, and I want to welcome you to Theology on Tap, where we're going to be talking about life in the new normal here at Oil Horse Brewing Company in downtown Longview. I am joined with two other esteemed guest panelists, and they will introduce themselves thusly. Hugh Kendall.
Got it. All right, so I'm Kendall Land. I'm the pastor at First Presbyterian Church here in Longview. It's just a couple of blocks that way. And I am not a reverend doctor. I am only a lowly reverend.
Wait, yes. You're in the process.
You're a reverend doctor in training.
I'm a reverend doctor in training.
You're getting there.
But isn't everyone a reverend doctor in training?
No, because
it really doesn't matter until you graduate, right?
Listen, I want to talk positive thoughts here.
Okay.
I want positive speak here.
Okay, positive speak it is.
Right.
Right. And so, in addition to what Evan talked about, we're also going to be talking not only about what our new normal is in light of pandemic and church and everything else, but we're also going to talk about saints a little bit because it is March. And so we celebrate St. Patrick's Day in March. And since we're all three wearing green, we thought that we would spend some time talking. It's weird on the feed, but we really are wearing green.
Yeah, it's there.
Spend some time talking about a little bit about saints and about hagiographies and things like that. If we had the whiteboard, we would write hagiography on there. But we don't have a whiteboard, so we'll just talk about it later.
Name drop.
I'm Mike Skelton. I'm the lead minister at Longview Christian Church. I am not a reverend doctor in training. Maybe one day. So, because I'm basically an intern at Theology on Tap, and I said I was the guy that got here an hour early and set up everything twice. So there's that. So I'm the pastor at Longview Christian Church here in town. It's a lot of fun doing that. Tonight, also, I'm going to participate in the conversation around the new normal, particularly looking at what image bearers like us as believers, a little bit of responsibility, a little bit of mindset, a little bit of kind of like marching orders going forward with that. So just kind of like a reminder, if you're watching us on the stream, so thank you so much for tuning in.
Yes.
You can type questions or comments or anything like that. Anything that you might want Kendall to explain or put on a whiteboard. We reference a whiteboard. We haven't had one in almost 2 years at Theology on Tap. That's real. So we may need to talk about that in the future. That's a deep cut right there. But it's a joke that comes back almost every time. So
I think at one point, didn't the whiteboard have its own Twitter
it
feed?
Still does.
So it
It still does.
All right.
Yeah. Should I tweet
Nobody
them
follows
later?
Yeah, that would be great.
I think it's just me following.
Yeah, it's inside jokes from Theology on Tap.
Listen, I love
there
it.
you go.
I'm gonna share it real fast.
Yeah, go ahead and do that. Please do that.
Yeah, let's talk amongst yourself.
Just talk amongst yourself. Okay, so while you're sharing that, Evan, why don't you go ahead and get us started with the saints that you're going to talk about tonight?
Yes, so I didn't share, but I'm gonna do it later. Okay, so my saint is Saint Elizabeth of Hungary.
Okay.
Right, and so Saint Elizabeth is one of the, every saint has kind of a group or a patron saint of whatever, and that's hospitals and nurses and a whole host of other things. And the only reason I know about Saint Elizabeth of Hungary is that I worked at Saint Elizabeth Hospital in Beaumont, Texas, as a chaplain there. I was a chaplain there for a few years, and before I came up here to Longview. And every November, either 17th or 19th, usually 19th because that's when the official date is we would celebrate St. Elizabeth Day. And we had a huge icon of her in the main entrance of St. Elizabeth Hospital. St. Elizabeth of Hungary was a princess, and she married a prince. That's how you become a princess, by the way, in case you're wondering. And she had a passion and a heart for serving the poor of the people in the town where the prince and princess lived. So she would leave the castle, the guarded walls and everything, and go and she would feed the hungry with bread. The baker would bake more bread. She would go and pass all the bread out. Well, the prince didn't like that, and he commanded her not to go and serve bread to the poor people. He thought that if they were poor, that's how God wanted them to be, That's not theologically appropriate or right. And said, let them, just do their own thing. You're a regal heir estate. You should not worry about that. Well, St. Elizabeth is not like that. And so she, one day, had a whole basket full of bread, and she is taking it out to the poor people of the town, and the prince catches her and says, what is in the basket? Show me. And she opens the basket, and it's full of roses. So God had miraculously changed the bread into roses. And she said, I'm just giving the people roses because you said not to give me bread. And so every time she was caught, God transformed the bread into something different to trick the prince, so that she still was able to feed the people of Hungary. She died in her 20s of illness from working with the poor people of her town. And so she was canonized by Gregory the IX, and she that was like 1230 something, and so she's the patron saint of hospitals and nurses and care workers, and you can see her have a crown, or she's holding a bread basket, loaf in one hand and a rose in the other, and that's St. Elizabeth of Hungary.
Wow,
there you go. Cool. Every day.
That's pretty awesome. I had no idea about that.
Yeah, it's a cool little story because, it's talking about how, we would celebrate it every year at the hospital, but also it was a way of showing that God uses people to do things in people's lives. And when people try to stop us to serve the poor and feed the hungry and care for the sick, that God was still going to be able to recognize our good works and still make a way for that, because the prince tried to stop her, and every time he tried to stop her, God created a miracle so that would not happen. So, that is St. Elizabeth of Hungary.
Thanks, Evan. I like that too. So we're all in the Protestant tradition, and so we don't really celebrate saints very often. Right. Our Episcopal brothers and sisters do, our Catholic brothers and sisters do, but it's not a big deal really in our traditions. But I like that, why would it matter to tell these stories about the saints? But that's really a great way of putting it. It's kind of like, the saints give us examples of how we concretely live out the gospel, and that's pretty good.
Right, yeah. I think too often when we think about the saints, we think about them being perfect people. And and we hear all these stories about how that's not true. I mean, saints are examples of people that we want to look and try to be like, but they were fallible human beings. And so, she was just a woman who wanted to help feed the poor, and what better Christian thing to do than to do that? So, yeah.
I think that's important to emphasize, because there's an idea if perfection is our model, there's the mindset because we cannot achieve perfection, so why even try to do that?
Right.
Why reach for the stars? But the moon's pretty good if you land there.
Right.
So there's a whole mindset. So we're looking at very human people doing very godly things is a very encouraging thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, because I think that goes back to even in our church life, when we think about ministries or projects or programs we want to do, we already think about how the 10 reasons why it's not going to work instead of allowing. Yeah, that never happens, right?
Yeah.
Right. People. And so I think that helps us to kind of see that even when we have barriers in our lives, God is still working through that and still able to that we're able to overcome. And and she could have easily just said, "You're right. I'm subservient to you as the prince, and I'm going to do it." But she said she had a call from God and a heart for the people who needed to be fed in their town. She didn't like that she was of wealth and means, but the people outside the walls of the castle were not. So, it's one of my favorite ones.
All right.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's my turn now to talk a little bit about another saint. This is Saint Bridget, spelled B-R-I-G-I-T. Since we were talking about our motivation was St. Patrick, who is Irish. Saint Bridget is also Irish. She was not a princess.
Oh.
We think she lived sometime around the year 500. And I say we think because there's kind of some debate, questioning, I guess you might say. So St. Bridget was Irish, and it was about the same time that Christianity is moving into Ireland. And so a lot of the traditions of the Celts in that area were being taken by the church and used by the church to tell the gospel story. And so there was a Bridget cult. There was a Bridget goddess, spelled the same way, Brigit. So there is some question. I was like, did St. Bridget really exist or not? And I don't know the answer to that, so I'm just going to go with that she did, since I wasn't around in the year 500. So one of the hagiographies about St. Bridget, hagiography. So hagiography is a word that means essentially, it's an ography, such a writing of, and it's like an idolized writing of people. So whenever you want to venerate someone, you would write a hagiography of them. And commonly speaking, hagiographies are generally used to refer to stories about the saints, because all the stories about the saints are really miraculous and amazing. So St. Bridget, she was known as, I was trying to figure this out while you were talking. We talk about patron saints. I guess she would be a patroness saint. Would that be correct?
I think it's the same word.
No, right? Gender neutral?
Yeah,
right,
sure.
That.
Yeah, I'll look it up. Hold on.
Based on the Roman tradition of patron, a female could still be a patron.
Okay, so St. Bridget then, she was a patron saint of a couple of different professions. One was of milkmaids, and another was of beer brewers, which I thought would be appropriate since we're at the Oil Horse tonight, where they obviously brew their own beer. So as a milkmaid, when she was a child, before she entered the church, the morning that she was taught to go with the women and to go to milk the cows, it is said that after she was supposed to milk the cows and make butter, and at the end of the day, she was going to be checked to see how much butter she had made and if it stood up to how much all the other women had made. But she had such a heart for the poor,
right,
that before she had a chance for her milk and butter to be checked, she gave it all away to those who were hungry and thirsty. And so when it came time for her butter and milk to be checked, she lifted the lid, and lo and behold, it was miraculously full of butter and milk where there had previously been none.
Okay.
So it was, again, God interceding on behalf of someone who had worked on behalf of others. So Bridget was a fairly well-known figure. Evidently, it is said that her parish, so the area of churches that she was in charge of, was the majority of Ireland. And so there was a couple things that would happen. One, because she was so well-known, people would come to her seeking certain miracles, and it was said that whatever you came for and asked of her, she would give you. And so there's a story about a leper who comes to St. Bridget and asks her for the finest beer available. And they had no beer. All they had was, I think it was like, they called it, I think the words were bath water. Oh. And so she gave him a cup of bath water, and it was the finest beer ever. And it was like reminiscent of Christ turning the water into wine at the wedding feast of Cana. And then, but that's not why she is the patron saint of beer brewers. The reason she's the patron saint of beer brewers is that the Easter festival was coming up, and it was her responsibility, because she was in charge of this large parish, to make sure that everyone had enough beer to celebrate the Easter festival. Beer was a much more common drink back in the day than it is now for lots of different reasons. That's a whole different theology on tap. So, but it was important to have it for the festival. And not only did they not have any beer, they only had one sack of malt, and they only had one barrel and 2 empty tubs. And they had to make enough beer for the entire parish, which was the majority of the country of Ireland, to last throughout the Easter celebrations. And they were so worried about it, St. Bridget said, don't worry about it, just go ahead. And so they used one tub for when they would put the malt in there for it to steep the grains, or to mash. It was a mash tun. And then they would move the next, and it fermented in the next tub. And then they put it in the barrel, and there it aged and became good beer. And every time they would go to a different outpost in the parish to deliver this beer, it never ran out. That one barrel was enough beer to go not only throughout the whole parish, but throughout the whole parish long enough to last for the entire Easter celebration. So that's why she's the patron saint of beer brewers. And there's lots of other great stories about her. There's even one that says that she could have been the midwife to Jesus. So there's a story about how Bridget was actually flown over from Ireland by I believe it was a swan, not a stork. You would think a stork, but I think it was a swan, and flown to the Holy Land to help Mary give birth. Yep. So there's that.
So like the beard like not running out. It sounds like a mashup of like.
That's funny you said mashup. It's pretty good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Do
That's
that
good.
first.
All words are spoken
That's
intentionally.
good.
Yeah. So it's like a mashup of like Hanukkah and the Elijah story of the
Right.
oil. And
That's right. The oil never runs out.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There's tons of stories about Bridget, and a lot of them go along the lines of either something that just miraculously occurs again and again and again that shouldn't, or something has happened where she has tried to intercede for someone else, and God intercedes to make sure that she doesn't suffer for what she had tried to do for others.
yeah. I like that. We got a shout out on the stream. Someone watching, just kind of thanking, especially you guys, for talking through a couple of examples and seeing saints as examples to just give a piece of encouragement to those who are kind of like trying to live life well.
Sure.
And the idea of selfless people pouring themselves out, and then God picking up the slack, where humanity would fall short is a very powerful thing. It's just a good reminder, especially as those who find ourselves often in places where we are not enough and have to rely on God to really pick up the slack there.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a hubris thing to think that we can do it without God's help.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so we look to the saints, to say that, what is it like to fully trust in what God can do in our lives? Talk about a mustard seed and moving mountains. Okay, well, the saints put that into practice, so that and look what happened. We fear that happened. Bread was turned into roses so that poor people could still be fed. And it's not that it's not how much I can do; it's what God can do through me. It's not so much, and not trying to do everything on our own. And so, the saints help us to remind us that we're human. And that they were human, but they had a way of understanding who God was, and allowed God to work through them in a way that the miraculous could continue to happen.
Yeah, and there's a great combination too of the stories of like when you learn about the stories of the saints, it's a combination of like intentional miraculous actions by the saints,
Right.
and then accidental miraculous actions by the saints. But in all of them, there's a focus on a recognition that it is God who is at work doing these things, and not the saints themselves.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. It's like that, just that picture of, I'm going to do this because I know it is the right thing to be done. I don't know if I personally can weave this together. Sometimes we don't start doing things because we can't see ourselves, eventually, on the other side having done this. So why even bother to start? But the saints are such powerful examples because there's no hesitation. No, this is what I'm called to do. I'm going to do it, even if I don't know how I'm going to get to point B from point A.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that holds us back so often in ministry, because we want to have it succeed before we start.
Yeah.
Right. And that's not walking in faith. That's trying to have create our own ending before we start.
Yeah.
And how many ministry projects were left on the table because of that reason right there. So.
Well, not only ministry projects. I mean, and let's kind of like take things back a level. How many conversations with neighbors never take place because I don't know if I'm up to the task, or I don't know if there's so much hesitation that's there that just, we have these great examples that should be past that. So it is March, and I want to talk just like about St. Patrick. So St. Patrick is a character that I knew just by name only, based on virtue of the calendar, and he's another guy that is not Irish. He was likely a Roman citizen living in Britain, who was essentially kidnapped around the age of 16 by some Irish raiders. So they would come over and kind of plunder the British countryside and all that, and take slaves and goods back to Ireland and all that. And he was pressed into service as a shepherd. And so as he is shepherding out in the wilds, he has only his faith to comfort him during those things, as he's protecting this sheep of his, the one who has enslaved him. And so that's kind of the life of Patrick early on. But as he's there, really relying on God to persevere him through this particular season. He gets a couple of visions. Now, the first vision is more this idea of relying on God to, persevere through this season. But there's this idea that, God is very much real and he's very much in this season with Patrick, but also kind of shows him a way to get out of his present circumstances. And so he escaped slavery, walked over 200 miles, and then found his way back over to Britain. But his heart hurt for the Irish people that he was around, and so he entered the priesthood and trained to go back. And so he had this desire to take the gospel to Ireland. He's credited with taking Christianity to Ireland, or at least spreading Christianity on a large scale on the island. And so he does do that. And so he goes back and after, again, another vision, his second vision, or taking place in a dream, that this is supposed to be his life's calling in. There's that idea of not knowing how everything is going to work out, but a willingness to serve anyway. And he goes and he does that, and God uses his faithfulness to bring Christianity there. And he's someone which is so great, and it's something that I think that we see the church really kind of like grappling with how best to do that. He was a guy that looked to culture in order to make inroads with the gospel. So you see, what's known as like a Celtic crime. Just a picture of him putting it into paganism. And so the image of the snake was connected to that bit of fear and darkness, that little bit of evil that was in the world, and driving that age away and bringing in an age of light and the gospel. And so that could have been what it stood for. So there's a lot of cool stories about St. Patrick, and so much so we gave him a holiday on March 17th. And so
yeah. Well, and talking about the Trinity and the interlocking, this is what we did with our Theology on Tap shirts.
Oh yeah,
It's an homage.
Still available, by the way, if you're interested.
Yeah.
We do have E-necks as well.
E-necks, deeper than being closer to God, the worship pastor motto.
That's right.
That's right. So, yeah, we got it. Still have them back there?
I don't know who sells
Yeah,
t-shirts back
They're
there.
probably in a box in the back.
Probably.
Yes, we sell t-shirts.
We're dusting things off on Theology on Tap. So
Yeah.
we're making it
Yeah.
happen.
I think. Either. Oh, there we go. We're back. Let's make sure
We're back. So thanks for sticking with us on the stream. We really appreciate you. We had some lag issues there, but we're trying.
It happens. I'm glad to bet. Yeah.
We also experience this on Sunday mornings as well. Trust me, we are more frustrated than anyone else.
Yeah. It's terrible. Yeah.
I don't really care. I'm good. Doesn't bother me at all. I don't lag at all. What are you talking about?
There you go.
If they wanted to hear it,
I don't know about that.
if they wanted to hear it, right? You want to hear it in person, right?
That's right.
Whatever Kendall preaches, it's not a lag, it's just a dramatic pause.
Dramatic pause.
Dramatic
I like to call that the Presbyterian pause.
Oh,
Presbyterian
That's right.
pause.
Well, because sometimes
there it is.
it's just important.
There it is. Gotta get there. Gotta get there. Oh, she brought them out. Look, she brought them out.
Hey, we got shirts available.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Available
That's
right
right.
back there. There you go.
Hey, are we supposed to be talking about stuff?
Yeah, tonight we're actually, yeah. So we want to talk about saints to get things going, because
Yeah.
we're just happy to be in the same room together.
We haven't
You
been
know,
out in so long.
Yeah,
Right.
it's just been great. So yeah, but we're actually are going to talk a little bit about how we're considering what it is to minister in the new normal, but also just more like generally live in the new normal.
Right.
As things are opening back up today, Governor Abbott made a new executive order that's going to have manifest ramifications for businesses and schools and all that. Churches are going to also have to, reimagine what we're going to do in light of said proclamation, especially how this season has become particularly charged with things, and so we're gonna work and figure things out. But there's a lot more than just the kind of the practical stuff that we are dealing with. There's a lot that goes into a consideration of the new normal. So I thought we kind of spend some time talking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're coming up on a year. We're coming up on a year since Mayor Mack did the shelter-in-place order, which seems like, I don't know about you, 8 years ago. Holy Toledo.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems like, so how do we, and that's a phrase that I keep hearing, not just here, like in my everything about how we're going to move, and as much as I want to get back to normal, and how I want to get back to, some kind of homeostasis, it's one of those things that I just don't know how quickly we're going to be doing it, and then also what it's going to look like, because it's always going to be there. Like, on top of having all these other barriers to Christian ministry that we already have, that's going to be on there too. So I think the new normal is, like Mike said, we're working on it. It's the great unknown. And I think that's where we have to kind of be able to step out in faith some, and step out in our leadership as pastors, and just say, let's go into the dark, shadowy place like in The Lion King, and know that God, and know that God is there. Like, because we don't know where that road's going to lead us. And so I think that there's a lot of layers in there, and just saying, let's go back that way, how things were, it's just not going to happen.
No, I think you're right about that. And I mean, I think that we need to, rather than worrying about going back to the way things were, but try to see what we can embrace and learn.
Right.
So a couple of things I wanted to talk about tonight along those lines were, I want to throw some numbers at everybody. So this is just a quick little snapshot of numbers. So
Pastors and numbers. Hold
yeah,
on.
this is not going to go
Hold on.
well. There's a reason I'm not a CPA, so this could be really messed up.
3 and 1, 1 and 3.
Yeah, right. That's all I got.
That's all I
Yeah.
got.
How does 3 and 1 equal all? I don't. It doesn't matter. So I mean, it does matter,
It does.
but not for this conversation.
Move on.
All right, so numbers. All right, so just kind of a quick kind of reflection. So at First Pres, prior to COVID, we would worship, let's say between 75 and 125 on a Sunday. So average 100 people on a Sunday, right? So if you have 4 Sundays in a month, that's 400 worshipers, right? Maybe there's some overlaps, whatever, but it's 400 experiences of worship. Okay, let's put it that way. So a quick snapshot of what worship looked like for First Pres this month was 1,500 worship experiences. And that's not counting the 20 to 40 people that we have each Sunday. So you take the 20 to 40, 30 people a Sunday, 120 total, add that to the 1,500 that we're engaging with online.
Yeah.
So that's a huge difference between where we were pre-COVID. And because I think all of us are in places where if we are have an online presence, it's not going away.
Hold on. How many times does your mom watch the service?
A lot.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
She goes to her bridge club before they play cards. They watch, look what my son's doing. It's great.
Always on in the background.
Yeah,
Just
it's
go.
crazy. Every time I click on the YouTube thing, there's one more watcher. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand it.
It's hard. It's
Yeah.
different,
So anyway, so there's that. So that's one thing to think about. So that's kind of a really interesting, just an idea to think about. It's really easy to get depressed and sad when we realize the people who aren't worshiping with us that we don't see in person. But then to think about it, it's really multiplied exponentially. And I think probably all of us are like that from what it was prior to COVID.
Right.
So we take that, and then I want to kind of to look back a little bit at who I think would be a modern day saint, Mr. Rogers. There's a lot we can learn from Mr. Rogers.
Yes, we know he's Presbyterian. I'm gonna cut you off.
I didn't know he was Presbyterian. That's crazy.
Oh,
It's amazing. Yeah. Wow. A Presbyterian pastor who is an amazing human being. That is so amazing.
Never heard that here in the last 3 years.
No, never at all.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, before Mike starts talking about redemption, whiteboard jokes. I apologize. So, but one thing that I think is really interesting is when we started doing more of this online stuff. If y'all haven't seen the movies about Mr. Rogers, there's the biopic that has actually clips from Mr. Rogers' life and interviews with people from his life. And then there's the movie with Tom Hanks, who reminds us that for some reason Mr. Rogers sounds a lot like Forrest Gump, but it's still a really great movie. One of the things I think is really interesting when you watch that is that Mr. Rogers' idea of ministry was to use a new opportunity to reach more, and for him it was children. And that new opportunity for him was television, and it was because what was on television at the time was like disgusting to him. People thought it was funny to get hit in the face with a pie, and he thought, how can we teach our children that? That's a horrible thing to teach children. And so he tried to use television as an alternative to what was already on television, to use the ministry to proclaim the gospel and to spread the word. So I think that something we can all agree is that there's a lot of not so great things on the internet these days. But what if the church now has an opportunity to put something else out there on the internet that can truly change lives and can truly transform how people live and really put forth the message of the gospel?
Yeah.
And so that's kind of a lesson I think we can learn from, what was he, a Presbyterian minister? Is that what you said? Is that what you said? Yeah, Mr. Rogers.
I mean, it's a little fuzzy in the history, so it's kind of like St. Bridget. So
Right,
a little
exactly.
fuzzy out there.
But that really is something we can really learn from him, is that there was this media that he saw that had the opportunity to take people in a bad place and put them to a good place, and he used it to try to put people to a good place. So I think that's something we can learn from him. And so with that, I think that one of the things that I have seen churches do incredibly well during the pandemic is to respond missionally to the needs that are around them, more so than before. So before, it was really easy for churches to just be gathering places, and now it's really hard for them to be gathering places. And so now when we see churches act, we see them act in outward ways. And it's not always a hands-on thing, because we can't always do hands-on things during the pandemic, but it is definitely a reaching out in some kinds of way. And so I think that, so there is a professor at Princeton Seminary named Daryl Guter, who is a missiologist. which means that he studies mission. Yeah, Kenny's really happy about that. That's one of his professors.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I did it, Kenny, just because you were sitting there.
Right.
That's right.
Well,
Daryl Gooder talks about how the church is where like the modern day mission field starts. Right? So the mission, we used to think about mission like you go somewhere else to do it. You go to another country, you go somewhere else. Like Patrick, you go to a whole other Ireland where you were enslaved once or whatever. But Gooder talks about how from the church, that's where mission starts. And I think that this is something that we could really build on as a church as a whole right now, because people are really pushing to want to reach out to our neighbors, to try to see who is in need and try to see how we can help them in these new and different days. And I think that's a place where hopefully we continue to press forward there rather than just looking back and trying to create a church where it's just where we gather, but to continue with this idea where church is the place from which we go out to the world. So
can I drop a number on you real fast?
Sure.
Numbers?
Yep.
90% of churches that did not have an online presence before the pandemic now have an online presence because of the pandemic.
Wow.
Yeah, 90.
That's a lot.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, because like, particularly like at First Christian, we didn't have a live stream set up at our church. And then when Mayor Max said everybody stay home, we had to figure it out really quick. How are we going to do church? And worship, and so we were kind of forced into it like that. Luckily, we figured it out along the way. But you're right. So now we have all these churches who didn't have this presence now have this presence, and how they're going to do that. I love this idea of church being the starting point, because I know, like in my context, there's been a lot of talk of awareness of people. Losing jobs, losing housing, losing income and food, and stimulus checks aren't coming fast enough, or unemployment's not enough, minimum wage is way too low. All those kind of things that there have been awareness of this, and so there's this kind of I'm sitting at home doing nothing. I can only watch an okay amount of Law and Order on Netflix. I'm watching Criminal Minds, by the way.
Oh,
so,
yes.
Hey, what season are you on? Because the rest of my family's doing that too. What season are you on?
I'm almost done with 9.
Wow, you're way ahead of them.
Yeah. So in order, this is what I did after.
That's a lot of commitment.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm in it to win it. So.
Suddenly you didn't have to become a doctor anymore, and you had all this time on your hands.
What do I do now? So what I'm saying is that people are antsy because we have this idea in our American psyche that if you're not doing something, you're lazy, and so we think, well, we should do something, but what can I do to help my neighbor who lost their job, who lost their income, who just can't make ends meet because of whatever, and so and showing that the church, who probably has already been doing this in some form or capacity, it's kind of just like, we get the LCM, but now it's a more hands-on kind of up in front of your face kind of idea that this is what happens in a reality when there are the social safety nets that our government has in place fail us.
Yeah.
And how the church, it needs to be that stopgap, that bridge point to help that move along, and how that also connects to our faith of loving our neighbor as ourselves.
So there's been a lot of conversation, I think especially amongst our leadership team, about the idea of kind of just trying to remove ourselves as much as we can, and maybe take a step back and consider there's a temptation to think about all the things that COVID has taken. But there are a lot of things that y'all described that COVID has given us during this season. Like you mentioned the online streaming and all that kind of stuff. So we did just the bare bones minimum before. So we were streaming the sermon portion, we were streaming our community meditation, but that was mostly it. What we're doing now is we have multiple camera angles. We have an upgraded PC. Our internet bandwidth wasn't enough to really do a good job. So we brought fiber internet. And it wasn't to, when a Chevy would do, we thought we needed a Cadillac. It was about, there are people who are home.
Yeah.
And when we're delivering something choppy and gross, their only connection is as good as our internet stream. And so we have got to do a better job for the sake of the empire of God. And so there's something, that we needed to really be mindful of. And so as we kind of have a view for where we're going, there are some things that for the love of God, we shouldn't go back to the way things were before.
Absolutely.
Because it wasn't near as good if we take that particular thing, as a microcosmic example. What we're doing now is infinitely better. But another thing, like with the increase of video content, if you want to just kind of camp out there for a moment, I don't know about you guys, but watching myself every Sunday on video has now been a great tool to, I don't know, maybe try to get better. We have
I haven't had the guts yet to do that,
you've got to do it. It's the right thing to do. Because another one of the things that we say in our leadership team, we got to remove butts from the conversation. Longview Christian Church is a great place, but you got to remove butts from the conversation.
Sure.
So it's something like our worship team does. It's something that whoever preaches, that they do that as well. It's something that we evaluate. We think about how can we get ourselves as much out of the way as possible, so that just the glory of God can shine through and just not trip over, cause other people to trip over our human frailty, kind of the midst of that. And so when we think about the new normal, I think the new normal has the potential to be great.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's the potential for elements of it, at least, to be so much better than the way things were before.
Yeah, and what an interesting way to think about internet as a ministry tool. Usually it's just, that's what I do to check Facebook and my email. But now we're using it we're putting...
Oh, TikTok, man.
Oh, well, yes, follow me and my 11-year-old on TikTok. It's amazing. I love it. And praise God, Dad and Daughter. But again, before that was just a line item on the budget sheet.
Yeah.
And now you're saying this has to be something that we invest in, so that our message can reach our people. And now we're putting a priority on this.
No, yeah. So budgets had categories and are broken down, and that used to be. It still is, but I think philosophically it was under the category of subscription dues and all that kind of stuff. No, we're rethinking that is under missions now.
Right.
And that's our mindset behind it. We have invested in this. We're going to use this, to within an inch of its life. We made this major investment. How can we leverage this for the sake of the kingdom?
Right.
How can we be a host for other institutions to use it for the empire of God? Gosh, sorry, we need a whiteboard right here. Those favorite words, empire of God, is something that would be on there for sure. And so there's some just great opportunities.
Yeah.
We've gone through stuff, and going through stuff shapes us, and it should shape the church going forward.
Yeah. Oh, really great. Yeah, I love that.
So I know we're kind of playing with this new little format. Can I make a suggestion real quick?
Yes.
Can we take a little break for people to send in some questions for y'all to think about questions?
Yeah.
That way we get a little interaction. So we'll take a few minutes and then have some questions and some conversation. And maybe we'll take normally we like to try to give y'all something to talk about. So think about the conversation is what has
COVID given us?
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. So what are the things that COVID has given us? There's obviously we could spend all night all the terrible things that it's taken from us, and we have and will continue to mourn those that it's taken from us. But that's a great way to go. Yeah. So let's take a few minutes.
There are some index cards on that tree round table right there by the hand sanitizer, if you would like that as well. So there's probably some pencils around here as well that we can get for you if you would like to write down questions for us to consider up here as well, but kind of in that vein of topic. So gather around in a socially distant fashion and have a conversation, maybe sample some more stuff from the horse here.
If you're online, drop it in the comments and we'll try to get to it if we can.
Yeah, drop it in the comments. The stream is working right now.
It is. We're back
Hey,
up.
so how much time are we giving it? 6:48 now.
Let's do 12 minutes.
12 minutes.
Ooh, 12.
7 o'clock it is. All right, sounds good.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, and I
Dude, what's up? I'm looking for your telephone number. Text you. It's I can't hear. Bad job.
Thank you.
Oh, I've got some great ears coming. There's something. I just wish I could hear it. You need to talk closer to your mic and then yeah. But I can't see it sounds like.
Pretty good, man.
No, Brad didn't really believe it here. No, and I got one for you too. But all their our families. Okay, so just don't be like, I don't know, verbally,
Right.
she
Good job. Good
All right, so there is So there is a passage in Genesis that talks about that, which is when the sons of God and daughters of men, the sons of God have sex with daughters of men, right? And this is prior to the flood, but so it created that's vaginas. So, but there's also the theory that Goliath was a descendant of so giants.
see, that's what I've also heard as well. So, you know, you get to do both things, and
Something about giants.
especially with KJ, it's kind of hard to So, first thing to know is like, have you heard anything from the y'all have heard about the troops in Afghanistan in the early 2000s that went over there and the guy got a down by one, you know, and they were like aimed to the head, took him out, and they just evaporated.
Where this was, it was like there was a town, but there's a website called it's like you know that's so it's like it's more of a website. So like what you like it'll be randomly exactly randomly go to places. And there was every party there about like search here and they're like they found like exactly like
How's that, Matt?
Pretty good.
Anything you like to
I'm trying to think. Not really. It just makes me think. So I was the social media person. Before COVID, I was kind of like live. And now, I don't know, just like social media members. Yeah, especially for like my generation of like millennial Gen Z, where social media is where people get most of their news and most of their, they feel things out via social media and stuff like that. So, it's really nothing really.
So we could get the
I like St. Elizabeth a lot. Okay. That's my middle name. So
Oh, they're like my wife and my daughter's middle name.
I think it's a lot of things now. But I like that. Yeah. But I liked that she was of Hungary and she said I like looked all of them up while y'all were talking.
Oh, nice.
Their little icons and stuff.
Right.
one of my provocations. This is the best particular training that you can add 3 minutes and 54 seconds.
Good.
Old Donald.
Y'all just gonna take questions.
So we actually have things that
I probably did that about but I mean, usually we would have people with like questions in there.
Yeah, I don't think there's a whole lot of. I'm interested to see if there are any questions because I think this is just everyone's just kind of in a.
Yeah, so, you know, maybe questions.
We're getting older, fixing the pond, we didn't take the boat out, spend all that money.
That's true.
I don't know. I I still sit just based on the role that I've been in, still offering education via social media as well. Sermons
Given into mediocrity or not fully embracing it.
You just can't think of yourself anymore? All right, Nancy. So,
Yeah. What about you?
The church reluctant to get into live streaming or anything like that because you can be here with your family. That was kind of like, you can watch it later, then it's kind of like you want to fully commit to the cause. Yeah, so here, now you're doing that's your father. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, so that's a great combination of things. So in retrospective, ideas that we've got and that's because before it definitely was. I mean, it's fine for traveling and all that kind of stuff. It's better not do that too often.
But I let's say 6 months, like we're rocking and rolling, like we're all pulled together. How many of the people are going to come back to the building? I mean, what does that look like engagement wise and like industry wise? When they can just get it at home. That's hard.
We already have it.
Oh, sure.
It's something where, like, especially we're already in that spot, particularly like the early 60s crowd who are hanging out at the house now and have zero desire to like come in and be a part of it. The people who have the, take like an example, they have the most hours logged in like
You're home.
Well, yeah. All the years
What is COVID?
Hi, everybody online. I didn't forget you. I'm here for you. I care. Kendall and Evan just over there talking in the tap room. Come on.
Listen, I'm building community. We haven't been
Building community.
This is the first time in a year I've been back in this building. So
Jeez, it's like a kid who's no longer grounded.
that's right. That's right.
Running around the neighborhood.
Right.
He's got grass stains.
Yeah, I'm back. I'm here. If we have any more questions, send them up.
Any more questions? Give them to the Reverend Doctor.
Oh, thank you.
So like Rev Ev just kind of rolled off the tongue so well.
Yes.
So I was playing with this actually.
Were you?
This
Because it's the
afternoon.
question I've gotten the most. Not
Because-
what is your project about? How do you feel to be done? How awesome are you? None of those. It's, do we still call you Rev Ev? Because I've been Rev Ev for 12 years.
Right. So this is what I'm trying to figure out. So how do we get like Dr. and Dolly? Could probably go together.
I
It could
see.
be
Dr.
Droly. Like a Droly, maybe?
Droly.
Think Droly, maybe? I don't know.
Dr. Dolly was not bad.
Right,
It's
but
Dr. D. Just like Dr. Death.
Oh, bring it.
He was my favorite wrestler.
You gotta be careful with Dr. Doley because there's a dentist Dr. Doley in town.
Are you related to that dentist?
I am actually.
That's gonna make Christmas very difficult.
And also my cousin has a PhD, so it's be very
I feel
difficult.
like if you
Are
don't walk
all
around
doctors?
with like the dentist utensils, you'll be fine.
I'll let him do that.
As long as you don't come up to someone and, all right, go ahead and lean back in the chair. You'll be okay.
But I mean, all joking aside, that is the question I've gotten the most.
Yeah.
Is because I've known Rev Ev, I've been Rev Ev all over the country, and people know me as Rev Ev. So
All over the country. He's well traveled.
I have.
He's
Listen,
a known guy.
I've been around.
He's got a doctor, man.
I did.
I mean,
It comes with it. Yeah. So
I think he's got a passport too.
I do actually.
See? Told you.
It's valid even.
Yeah, mine's expired.
Why?
What a terrible time to get a passport.
I know. I had it before.
I bet that line is short.
That's right. Yeah. But yeah, so that's a question I get asked a lot. But so the answer is, we'll just see what happens. We'll see what name kind of comes up with the nickname. But people still call me Rev Ev. I also answer to it. If you want to call me, someone said Driven. I don't know about
Driven.
I don't know if I think about that.
That sounds
So-
like a
oh,
Bond
thank you.
villain to me.
Thank you. Let's see. You keep talking about my name, and I'll read this.
Okay.
Just keep talking about me. I'll read this
Yeah,
question.
please do. Hey, Mr. Rogers was the Presbyterian minister. In case you're
I don't know if y'all knew that or not.
I can do that.
Yep.
But
Roger's a good man.
He's a good man.
Good
Is
man.
that gonna
He's
come
good.
up on Sunday or Thursday?
There'll be a test on it.
Actually, you may not have noticed this, but it comes up every Sunday. Just no one ever notices it every Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's very, very subtle.
Oh,
Well, it's just because he's recorded one sermon.
Just over and over.
No, that's why I haven't watched it. It's just the same thing. every
No one
year.
has come back on.
That's right.
That's why there's so many hits and views. It's the same
It's cumulative.
It can't be like 1,500 views.
It's 1,500 views
One
since
Okay.
last March.
All right, so we can quit abusing me. So I
No,
did.
this
This
is our
is not.
favorite
This
sport.
is not a question. It was just
Oh.
a comment that we got from our favorite Theology on Tap poet, Larry Carrington.
Oh, Larry.
He's not here with us tonight,
Larry.
but he's watching us. He's with us on the stream, and we miss you, Larry. But he wanted you to know that the reason he's not here is because he gave up beer for Lent, and he thought it would be too much of a challenge to be here, and so. But he's with us online, and so thank you, Larry, for being with us online.
Miss you, Larry.
See, you can get a shout out from the bar.
Nice.
We're not tempting you at all. I promise.
Larry,
Bartender knows you by name. Can't imagine why you would give up beer for Lent. Yeah.
Did you get a mention for Lent?
Yes, I did
What did
actually.
you give up?
I gave up yelling for Lent. There was
Maybe the
one.
Land family could leave a comment of how that's going.
Well, there's definitely been one time that I broke my fast. And
So you only yell on Sundays now.
right, yeah. I wake up Sunday morning just yelling at my kids.
Just
Get
air
out
all
of
the grievances.
It's the airing of the grievances. Then we have the feats of
On
strength.
Tuesday.
Yes.
You're like, you need to clean us up in your group, like, do I need to tell
Did
you
you,
to
like-
love?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's when my kids come to church and they're just like this. It's because they've just been just yelled at all morning long. Yeah.
Yeah. Did you give up anything?
No.
No, I didn't either. Yeah. I gave up a lot this last year, so I figured.
Yeah.
So I was kind of figuring, keep it going. So. All right, so let's jump into the questions here.
Okay.
Look at that segue. Learned that when I got my doctorate. Got my doctorate, by the way. 2 weeks ago.
We know we're all proud of you.
I said,
Wait, are you a doctor now?
I am a doctor.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Is there a doctor in the house?
That's what I wanted on my cake at my celebration. My wife did it for me. Is there a doctor in the house? That's what she did. That's why she's great.
She's way too nice. You
is.
you totally
Yeah.
outkicked her coverage on that.
Every man marries off, so that's I definitely do. With so much good content on the internet, what does the local church have to offer that can't be found elsewhere?
I mean, Kindle's had 1,500 views.
Okay, it's a lot of views. It's a lot of
That's
views,
not good
right?
content on the internet.
That's right. I'm gonna tune in this week. I'm gonna 15 We'll see what's up.
That'd be
All
great.
right, so the question is, with so much good content on the internet, what does local church have to offer that can't be found elsewhere? That kind of goes into the question that was dropped into the comments too, about what now is the role of the local church if people can get a stream from any of our churches, right? So what now then? Because before it was you got to be in church.
Right.
Your family is here. This is your home. This is your home base. This is where you get energized, where you see you learn, you get educated, you get charged up to go do God's work in the world. And then COVID said, not today.
Right.
And so,
Today, church.
so we've been doing this kind of halvesy thing. Like I have parishioners who won't come back until they have the second vaccine in their arm, right? And I have some people who probably won't come back because they like being able to watch it, on their couch or from the Church of Celia Foster-Peter. And so that's a bed, by the way.
If you have to explain it, it's not funny.
Listen, it's doing that.
It's because he has
okay.
a doctorate.
Trust me, I'm a doctor.
I gotta explain it. I'm a teaching doctor. I
Right,
teach
yeah,
everything.
right.
Yeah.
So so now, like, how do we get? So the question I think that's kind of centered around is, so what now is the role of the physical, in-person local church if we're producing a content that is good, that people can just access whenever
Oh,
they
see,
can?
that's not how I read the
Okay,
the
Well,
question.
there
Yeah.
are two baskets here. We
Yeah.
do need to talk about that, but
Yeah.
we also need to talk about like the first basket there.
Yeah.
What does the church have to offer when there's a lot of good internet content out there? So those are a couple of different things. And I tell you, that's been the biggest thing with it that we have personally been wrestling with as a church is like the natural competition like on the internet. The natural competition that's on the internet. That's the thing there that we've really been struggling with because there are so many better preachers out there than what you get on the LCC stream on a Sunday morning. Exactly. He's got like 1,500 views. So much better.
Mr. Rogers didn't have that.
Mr. Rogers.
Mr. Rogers definitely has that.
I mean, it's a beautiful day in his neighborhood. So that's right. And so that's that. And there's always a thing there. And so there is this like great challenge amongst like us and like, you know, trying to, well, not compare ourselves in an unhealthy way to, you know, guys who are, well, like they're not necessarily like shepherding people and stuff. Like their calling is different, but they're also on the internet. But their calling is different. And so there's this idea of like the content is different. And then, you know, the whole production and things like that. And so we've tried to get better. We've tried to remove butts from the conversation because that's one of our values. And as we're trying to like going forward and doing this and trying to remove a lot of that brokenness from us so as we can like better showcase things. But I mean, it's not going to be Hollywood quality. That's not even, I don't even know if that shouldn't even be a goal. But the idea is this is never going to stand in the place of what could be experienced in person. Like that's like that's how we have approached this. This is never going to take the place of what could be experienced in person. But how can we make it as good as it can be? And so that's been our mindset going forward. And so like what we see is, you know, people's like, you know, this is good, but I can't wait until, or this is good and it, you know, gets me through like while I'm traveling, or this is, you know, good, but, and so there is still a tension that's there. And so when you're looking for a show, you can find a better show. But if you're looking for a community, there's a way to tap into that thing that you know. And there's also like another way that this has kind of impacted the way that people shop for churches.
Sure.
Like this is like we consider what we do now as almost as part of like what we call our impact team, kind of that first touch. You know, people, you know, they're going to check your website, they're going to check your stream. Like, you know, do they like the, you know, the preaching? Do they like the worship set? Do they like those things and all that kind of stuff? That happens now, like, you know, ahead of time, whereas that may not have been the case. So so there's a couple of things I can go along with that.
Okay, so here's my take. It's a little different. So I don't remember who told me this, but someone early on in the pandemic was sharing with me about how they, on a Sunday, like they would watch the church that they were a part of, then they would watch another church, and they'd watch like 3 or 4 different church services. And they would worship online with 3 or 4 different with church services. And they weren't necessarily all the same denomination. They weren't even necessarily all in the same geographical area. Just for whatever reason, that was how they worshiped that Sunday. And so they were worshiping in multiple congregations on the same Sunday. And there is kind of this weird sense that we all have, whether we talk about it or not, that we feel like we're competing with one another to get people to come to the church where we are.
Right.
But I think that one thing that the church online has offered that could be, I don't know that it is, but that could be different from the rest of online content is that it could be that the churches online could look at their presence online in a non-competitive way. Like we could look at it as an opportunity make it a little more redemptive, an opportunity for people to be exposed to like different denominations, different theologies. Like one of the things that we love about Theology on Tap is that we all have very different theologies. There's a lot of things we agree on, a lot of things we disagree on, but we come together to have a greater understanding about God. And so I think that we're looking for the things that the church can offer online that is different from the other stuff online. It is that this diversity of churches, the 90% of churches that now have an online presence, now together offer a huge diversity that can give people an opportunity to not just shop for different churches, but to learn more about different churches and to learn more about different points of theology. and to listen to things and think, man, I really want to dig deeper into that, or I need to pray about that, or what does that mean, and all that. I mean, I think it's a great opportunity for, it could be, and I know I'm being overly optimistic for me, which is very weird. Weird, I know, it's COVID. It's one of those things. I'm not being very pessimistic. I'll try to do better next time. But like, what if we're on the verge of another great awakening? Religious great awakening. Because people are being exposed to different kinds of worship that is just, that they want to be a part of. Now, they may only want to be part of it from the Church of the Sealy Posturepedic.
Right.
That's a bed, by the way.
It's a bed.
But still, what if that's what we're a part of now?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, Phil Stickle said that about, every 500 years, there's like great shifts, and the last one was the Protestant Reformation in 1517. And so, I mean, we're kind of due for one, and here this has happened to us. It's going to take a mind shift to not, because before when we were.
Hold on a sec. What? This is Mike's part where he says a paradigm shift.
Oh yeah, paradigm shift. I like the word paradigm.
Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah. So it will take a paradigm shift, because before, I was going to say it, but
I just never heard the word before.
It actually was in my project. So,
I'm sorry, was that in your doctorate?
It was in my doctorate.
Okay.
I'm a doctor now. Before the pandemic, shut us down and made us not have to go online. We had that tendency to count the heads in the local church, count the cars. Like you're across the street from St. Andrew, you can definitely see how many more cars are across. I can do that with Trinity and with St. Anthony Catholic, and it's going to take the shift into thinking that worshiping at home is part of the community and part of the body of Christ, just as if they were physically present. Because before it wasn't. Because now it's not just people who are sick and can't come, or ill, or too weak or something that can't come that we're ministering to. Now it's people who say, you know what, I like being able to be part of my community in this way and learn on sometimes 10 o'clock on Sunday doesn't work for me, and so
yeah, that's a philosophical wrestling match right there.
I completely understand, and I agree, because I like having people in the building. I like that energy that happened. Like we had we usually during COVID we have right now since we've been back, we probably had about on average 50 people in the building, but we had 90 this past Sunday, and there was a different energy there because of it, and because of adding those people. And so it is going to be this kind of this tug of war is happening, this push and pull of, okay, are we going to go back to the way things work? Are we going back to how we started and saying this is the home base? This is how this is where we get we plant our roots and we build community, or we say you being at home and watching the service is just as equally good as you being here, but now you have the potentiality of seeing other voices in that field. I don't know where it is. The cynical side of me has said that people will not watch it and they'll just stay home and say they did. But also, I want people, but that also doesn't mean that when they're at church, they're listening to what I have to say anyway. Because I tell people to be nice every Sunday, it doesn't happen. So I think you're right, Mike, that there's this kind of philosophical kind of tug of war that's happening within churches, but I also think within pastoral leadership of almost redefining what is the church, which is a whole different theology on top. But also that's kind of what we're going towards, because if we're going to live into this new normal, into this new paradigm of a post-COVID, world that I hope we get to soon, it's not going to be the same as it was before, like it began, right?
You're right, but the church is never the same.
Absolutely.
Like every day, the church is different.
I agree.
That is part of the reformata semper reformanda. Reformed always being reformed according to the word of God and the Holy Spirit.
You give me crap for using the word paradigm.
Yeah, I know. I feel bad about that now.
It's okay.
Maybe I'll repent of that during this Lent and not make fun of you for using the word paradigm. How does that work?
You didn't give that up for Lent, though.
Oh, never mind. Maybe I'll just yell at you later and make it better. So, but that's the thing. So, we often it's very easy to look at our churches, whether it is our individual churches or as the church universal, as this monolithic structure that doesn't change and doesn't move.
Right.
But the reality is, every time a different person walks through a different church door, it changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every time the Spirit breathes and moves, it changes. I mean, like, you know, the funniest thing to me is that the way we talk about worship today is we talk about traditional and we talk about thank you, contemporary worship, right? So
Contemporary.
yeah, so
That means so many
contemporary
wrong things.
contemporary worship started in the 1970s, so that's what we're calling contemporary now. And what we call traditional started in the early 1900s. So like neither one of those things are contemporary or traditional, but that's what we call them. And we're convinced they've always been that way, or they're just now that way. And none of that's true. It's all this big amalgamation of both. I mean, the church is constantly changing all the time.
Yeah, I agree.
So like you know, when people have talked about, like you were talking about this earlier, Evan, whether we're trying to get back to where we were, it's impossible.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
church never goes back to where we were. We're always going somewhere new forward that we don't know where we're going, and that's part of living in faith.
Yeah, there was a professor at Bright who every time you meet her or talk to her, she always says, "Nice to meet you again," because she believes that between the last time she saw you and the time she sees you now, that
She
you are.
just didn't remember your name.
No. She talks about. Oh, now I feel sad. No. She talks about this in one of her classes. That it's intentional because she thinks that before the last time she saw you and the next and this new time that she saw you, you have been have been changed. You've been changed because of the interaction, the people that you've been, the change in your personal life, your family life, your church life, your religious life. Things have happened, and now you are a completely different person than the person you were. It could have even been a day, and she's very intentional about that wording with everyone. And nice to meet you again, because you're now a new person. I think you're absolutely right that that's where the church is heading in that regard.
I'm unsold.
You're unsold on that?
Yeah.
On that?
I understand the premise.
On that premise, or?
Wait, are you unsold on
the
premise,
professor,
or whether or not she actually remembered
the
who Evan
professor?
was?
Yeah.
Are you telling she remembered who Evan was?
Yeah, I don't think so.
No, she does it to everybody, so it's just a thing.
Yeah, that's what she tells everybody.
That's what she tells everybody.
I hear her.
We didn't give up cynicism for Lent.
Yeah,
He gave up yelling. I gave up nothing.
that's fine.
So anyway,
Jesus, too. All right. No, but I think that is one of those things that I talked about at the very beginning. Like our country is not going to be the same because 500,000 people are not with us anymore because of this virus, right? Millions of people have gotten the virus. And some people are still having the effects of this virus. Either with smelling or tasting or breathing or heart issues. The people in our communities are completely different because of what we've gone through. I mean, there's been a lot of
so if I could ask a question.
I'll allow it.
So a bona fide doctor and one to be. There's some people who are experiencing like a lingering and maybe even a growing frustration with a lot of the mindset of the distancing and the masking and just kind of the general polarization that we're experiencing right now in a lot of our churches.
Yeah.
And like there's that particular sentiment that's reconciled with some traditional views of some very popular passages of scripture, like wherever two or more are gathered.
Yeah.
And don't forsake meeting together, as some have given to do, and look for ways to stir one another up and things like that. So as we consider those things like that in light of COVID, like how do we navigate those particular waters? And this is a bit of a shout out to one of the questions we got on the feed.
Sure.
Wait, so are you asking, like, how do we try to navigate the waters?
How do we reconcile some of the, either in black and white or red and white text that we have in Scripture with kind of like where we are right now?
Oh, okay.
As things seem to be like opening up a little bit. And this is kind of like maybe even circling back around to one of the things that we were going to consider talking about, like what do we even invite people to these days?
All right, so are you asking them, like, so how do we reconcile the scriptural concept of where like two or more gathered implies a physical gathering versus a virtual gathering?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So my thing has always been, because I've heard that question a few times, and I always go to the Valley of Dry Bones. So when in the Valley of Dry Bones, which I have no idea what the exact scriptural reference is, to me, And it's when it's the prophet Ezekiel, and God takes Ezekiel and puts him before the valley and says, there was a big battle here, and there are bones here, and prophesied to these bones. So suddenly, with the power of God, these bones that are under the earth are brought back together and are knit sinew to sinew and muscle up on bone and breathe the breath of life into them. And if God can make that happen, God can make us gather over Zoom. Right? I mean, that's kind of how I go at it. Like, if that is the power of God, then surely the power of the Holy Spirit can be at work when we are on a Zoom call or YouTube or whatever it is. Or what are we on? StreamYard?
StreamYard.
Yep.
StreamYard, shut up.
Yep, exactly.
Streams to multiple platforms.
Right. But
Yes, and there's a paid for version.
I also think, that I totally agree with that.
We are not sponsored, by the way.
Right.
Although, if you would like to sponsor
Sponsor us.
StreamYard and you're paying attention,
That's right.
we have T-shirts for sale.
That's right.
I think technically speaking, we are sponsored with regard to StreamYard by Longview Christian Church.
Right. Oh, that's true. Yeah, you guys make I agree. I mean, I think too, being in the Lenten season and making the approach to Easter, I mean, one of the the lessons of Easter is that in a place that the world says is dead, God can bring life to. And so while it's not ideal that we can't meet together because we like that, but then is that familiarity of that. But also knowing that God's not contained within the four walls of a stained glass building. That God is everywhere we go. Everywhere that we try to go, God's already there. And so I think that there is, and I understand that frustration, that hesitancy. I mean, I have minister friends who up in the DFW area who have not been together since March. It's all been online, and so that they're definitely, it's taxing and it's weighing on people. But they have to believe that they're offering something and worshiping that God can work, that you can worship outside of the pew that you've been sitting in since Jimmy Carter was in office. So I'm saying that with that, two or more gathered doesn't have to necessarily be like how we are here. I mean, if we are together and we're in community and we're trying to connect with one another and be with God, I think that's something God honors that and sees that as something to beautiful and to be loved. And I think too, when it comes to distancing and masking and stuff, that it's not ideal, but Jesus said to put others before ourselves, and so we're going to try to do that.
So can we draw a line of difference between tuning into a stream and perhaps an intentional engagement, even if it's through alternative means, continuing to invest in community? Or would you say that just tuning in on Sunday is still some sort of participation in the body? Or are we looking for secondary communication? Again, as we imagine continuing this transitional period, not just dealing with COVID, maybe if you think larger than that, dealing with the church and what we're encouraging people to be a part of. I think for me, I'm still in the place of, the stream is a good place to start, if that's where you're at. The stream is a good place to start.
Right.
But genuine community, I think, needs to be a next level, because even attendance on Sunday morning is not necessarily the same as iron sharpening iron with a brother as you're walking through scripture and things like that. Just attendance in a building does not guarantee a participation in community.
Right.
So I see it as analogous. So just tuning in there's still something missing there if there's not a secondary conversation where you can participate on a Zoom call and talk with one another and ask questions, or you can pick up the phone and be present even if you're not in the same room. I am personally willing to draw a line and say, no, there's a difference there. Consuming content is not the same as being a part of something.
So I'm thinking about Anne Lamott wrote a book, Traveling Mercies, and she talks about her coming to the church, and the way she came to the church was there was a church. I'm not going to say what denomination it was, that she would go and visit, and she would go there after the service started, and she would leave before it finished. And normally she says she was pretty hungover when she was there, and she would sit in the back and not engage with anyone. And she did that on and off for like a year and a half, 2 years, until one day it was, and she uses in her book the metaphor of a cat coming into her, like letting a stray cat into her house. It was like, and it was Jesus coming into her life. And so, and it was that, like, barely engaging online. It was that bare engagement that was just kind of there, that, you know, it's that changed her life completely.
Sure.
So I mean, I don't know. So I have it's a challenge for me to say, like, is that enough to just engage online? Absolutely, it's enough.
Yeah.
Can there be more? Sure. But I mean, I think that's like, you know, if you want to get to like a theological thing, it'd be like like an analogy with cheap grace, right? Like, cheap grace is still grace. It's just cheap grace.
All right, so let's hold on. Let's clarify something.
All right.
Because that person that you cited in that example, what was that it for her? Like
No,
Tuesday?
it was not.
Okay, so that because.
But if she got hit by a car after that, it would have been.
Right, I'm not questioning someone's eternal security. Okay.
All right.
Especially with someone with a Reformed tradition. I'm not doing that. But I am saying that when it comes to, like, you know, I'm fully engaged in this, you know, body of believers, as someone who would self-identify as a mature and growing Christian, and the only thing that they do is watch a stream. Like, I'm saying, like, I would say, you know what? I think there's something more for you there. I think that's where I'm at. I'm not saying, like, you know, the missional component. I am 100% all in on the missional component of the internet. There's a huge, like, growth opportunity for the church, and 90% of churches have jumped in on that, and that's a beautiful thing. But there's something more that we can get.
Fellowship.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. I mean, like, that's it. Like, yes, there's always more. Right. Yeah.
I know you agree with me. I just want to, like, make sure we're like.
No, yeah, because I was missing you, but yeah, now I'm with you now. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're saying, like, because what I'm hearing you saying is that the experience, whether in person or online, must then lead to something in us to enact the faith that we're trying to live into.
I don't like that word "must." I think it's like it could. It could, and we hope that it does, and we pray for it to.
The ideal.
Yeah, the ideal. Because if you say that's something like, you must do,
as
then
we're
it's
looking
like
at the whiteboard of discipleship on the office, we imagine, like, okay, so this is the entry point that we're going to craft here for someone when they come to visit, you know, First Pres or Longview Christian Church. Okay, this is the entry point, and we have all these particular entry points right here, and that's going to funnel in this particular direction. Like, you know, this is what we want people to know and be a part of, and this is how we're going to, like, craft all these things. Yes, we think about these things.
Right.
And we imagine how these things could impact someone's life for the sake of the empire of God. And so all of these things right here, like, these are like the ideal. It's not just that one thing that's there. This like just attending, that's not the ideal. I mean, it's great.
Right.
And,
right.
The idea is that because of attending either online or in person, that could, I would say, for faith should drive us to do something more than that, than just particularly attending. You know, that faith and worship, and worshiping and coming with the community, whether online or in person, has us with the proclamation of the word and having the sacraments that allows us to then go out into God's world, knowing that we do not go alone. You know, to be God's hands and feet. And so I think that just simply taking in content has its benefits, and it's
sure,
yeah, and kind of like Amazon, there may be a building up to, but you can't stay just engaging and just watching a stream without that faith, without that impacting you, and then thus the call of the gospel to serve the hungry, feed the hungry, clothe the naked,
I mean, it's like a kid never graduating past chicken nuggets. There's so much better out there for you.
True.
Chicken tenders.
Ooh.
Lord. All right, before things get away, any other questions we need to address here that we haven't kind of already touched on in like some kind of nebulous idea?
COVID has shown how easy to I'm having trouble with I have 4 children. I should be able to read this.
All right, we're going to let you just read for a minute. I think we have a question from the crowd out here. While you read, go ahead and read, and we'll handle the question from the crowd.
How has the streaming aspect of church affected your online giving? I know, it may be hard on you, but...
Yeah. Can I tell a really great story? Yeah.
Sure.
So I'm going to do that. So the question was, how has moving to, let's say, a streaming model affected like giving in the local church? So I want to brag on my church. So the last Sunday of February is our annual congregational meeting, and we talk about a lot of inside baseball stuff, and we affirm elders who are like kind of staying on our board, and we reaffirm elders who are staying on, and we affirm new elders and all that kind of stuff. So we do that stuff, but we also present the annual budget and then kind of do like a retrospective and all that kind of stuff. So last year, on the first week of March last year, once like right after we announced like, okay, so we're going to be streaming for the foreseeable future. We streamed March until the first Sunday of June. We were back in person the first Sunday of June. So we did March, April, and May. But that same week, our treasurer sent out a letter to our body of believers. So before, we were like roughly 30% of all giving came through online. After he sent that letter, it's okay, this is what we're gonna do. But there are challenges when it comes to that, because there's still a lot of people who give primarily in person. With that, we saw a 65% increase in online giving that week. There was no get around to it, I'm going to mean to do that later. There was a 65% increase in online giving that week. And then there was a direct increase with people who were setting up bill pay. So bill pay, your bank sends a check to the church and all that kind of stuff. We did not miss a beat. And in our congregational meeting this past Sunday, through 11 months of our calendar year, giving had exceeded expenses by almost $10,000. And that's just like, that's huge. Not every congregation gets to say things like that. But I want to celebrate the Longview Christian Church for doing that, because there was a call, hey, we need you to be faithful, because we're not going to stop supporting our missionaries. We're not going to stop putting out content. Actually, we need to spend more money to upgrade our stream because it's awful right now. We did all of those things right at the very beginning, and people said, okay, we're with you. We got you. And it happened. And that was just an incredible thing to see God move through people. And so that's a story that we get to tell. But at the same time, we know that that's not a story that everybody gets to tell.
That's great.
Yeah, good job. So
and I have a take on it that's in a completely different direction that made me think of when you asked that question. One, that's really amazing. It's a wonderful story about when you ask, then it's given.
Yeah.
You just have to be willing to ask,
right.
And know what you're asking for. But for us, one of the things that I'll not say for us, for me, I can say is before, during the worship, the offertory, for those of you who aren't familiar with what that means, that's the music that's played while the offering plate is passed, right? And so before, the offertory for me was just so it wasn't quiet, so to make sure nobody was looking at who was putting what in the plate type thing, it was for one of those things. But we don't pass a plate anymore because of COVID. You're not supposed to be passing plates, but we still have an offertory.
Yep.
And we don't have people come forward or put anything in the plate. We just have a plate by the door, but we still have an offertory during worship. And the reason we do that is because our director of music and our organist felt like it was important to say that this is our musical offering to God.
Yep.
So it was like a way of liturgically reshaping how we understand offering.
Yeah.
So that it became more than just that time when money was collected. Offering became more than just about finances. It became about using our gifts for God. At least it is for me anyway. So that's been a big thing for me.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question. At First Christian, we kind of went through the same thing. We saw an increase in online giving and bill pays and stuff because people didn't want to get out, and we weren't physically face to face. And then we struggled with what do we do with this offering time, this offertory time that we have. And so one day we decided to do, usually like we would get up and say, it's, God loves a cheerful giver or whatever, and kind of talk about, whatever it's the please give us money pitch.
Yeah.
That's what it is. But what I started doing, because usually it's me doing the offering statement, is I would go through the outreach budget, and I would pull out like Longview Community Ministries, and I would talk, for 2 or 3 Sundays in a row about what Longview Community Ministry does and why it's important that we give money to those. And so it was offering and saying like, because usually it's just I toss it in the plate or I mail it in, and I hope I know where it's going. And if I'm bored enough and I want to look at the budget and understand columns of numbers, then I can do that. But now it's part of the worship experience of saying like, when we give, we're enacting our faith in such a way that it's benefiting this group of people, right? LCM, like we have a lot of volunteers that work in long community ministries. Like they would come in, or call us and say, "Hey, we're out of rice." And then I could say on that Sunday, if you have time or you have inclination, please go and do this for LCM. And then we saw that, like we asked for people to donate rice and beans, and they brought it by the church. I mean, we had pounds upon pounds of it, because in worship, while they're the worship service, we said this is an enactment of our faith, and we're able to do that. And so it wasn't just here's some scriptural reference and whatever that we may have done before, because we all assumed that everyone knew what the offering was about. So yeah, that's been an interesting way of kind of reframing how we've been doing that.
It's awesome to see the way that COVID has reshaped and reimagined liturgy.
Oh, absolutely.
That's been a really cool thing. Like,
right.
Yeah. All right, that's actually a pretty good segue into the question that I've got here. All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to change it just a little bit and hope I get it right all the same. So this is a question about like how COVID has we've been talking all about like how COVID has changed things.
Yeah.
This question is about how COVID has revealed things, right?
Yeah.
So the question is about our leaders and what COVID has revealed about our leaders. And I think we could also ask like what COVID has revealed about our churches. And it makes us ask the question of our leaders and of our churches. It has, in many cases, and it's not just COVID, anytime we experience some sort of a emergency, it reveals for us the difference between our, the right way to explain this, our real beliefs and our expressed beliefs, right? So like what we live and then what we say we ought to live.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So does that kind of get at the question a little bit?
Yeah.
All right. So what do y'all think about that either with our leaders or with our churches? What is it that COVID has revealed as the difference between the way we say we want to live and the way we really do live?
Yeah.
I'm glad I asked that question, because that means I really don't have to answer it.
Wait, I thought I asked.
Yeah, well, okay. Now I got to answer it too.
Presbyterian pause. So,
we're all lagging right now.
I know. Yeah. Right. How do this? Okay. I think part of it is that it has revealed some good things, like how the body has come together, like I said, around need, and it's shown. And also, this pandemic, which is still ongoing, it has shown us that there are some gaps and some things that are in our social safety nets and even in our society and in our culture. Part of me that I've seen, and maybe since we went through an election year, is so many, a lot of people, you can put a number on it however you want. A lot of people that I saw either online or even in person or whomever was taking the political stance of their political party and superimposing it on the Bible about how to live and act. For me, it's a non-issue about wearing a mask. I don't care if Governor Abbott says I don't have to wear it next week. I'm going to wear it because I'm going to love my neighbor just as much as I love my very own self. And the way I look at it, and if that's the truth, and we're supposed to love our neighbor as much as we love our very own self, then I don't know if we love ourselves that much. Because while I see our neighbor being loved in some ways, I don't see it happening in other ways. And that's a really sore spot as a pastor to see, seeing that how the love of God that we profess and we proclaim and we build our life upon, and we gather together and worship either physically or online, and we say, this is what we stake our whole life and everything that we believe on. And then when we get outside of the four walls of a stained glass church, we log off of Facebook Live, none of that really matters. And it's just gut-wrenching. And I've really struggled with that as a pastor myself, just how to navigate that. And I know this is not just a 2020 issue. I don't remember 2016. It wasn't pleasant either when it came to politics. And I think 2022 is going to be even worse for the midterms. But I find myself wondering how we get to a place where what we profess on a Sunday and we truly believe is less about internalizing, less about my needs and more about others' needs, and how the kingdom of God, empire of God can be lived fully into. And I just keep going back and forth on it because I'm at a loss, because I've really struggled this pandemic of seeing actions either by elected officials or non-elected officials, and some of the hateful and disparaging things about what has happened in our world, and how that's not being reflected in the life of Christ, and how that looks like outside of a church building. And I just said a lot there, but it's all good to say it. So so that's where I am right now. I mean, I'm struggling with that, like as a minister, as a newly minted doctor. So just because where I'm going with it, probably because I surrounded myself with this, because my doctoral project was about how to navigate politics and religion in church around immigration, and a lot of what we're seeing, with the immigration law and stuff like that, could also be applied to COVID, could also be applied to poverty, could also be applied to, you name it. And in the end, it's that taking the views of your stated political party and superimposing it on our Bible and making the puzzle piece fit instead of the other way around. And it just breaks my heart sometimes.
So you think God's being removed from our country right now?
No, because I don't think that the question was, do you think God's being removed from our country? No, because that's impossible. And also, like, which God? You're talking, like, who was it, Rob Bell, that said, "Tell me the God you don't believe in"? I probably don't believe in that one either. So no, I think that there is a part of Christendom or Christianity that all of us need to look at, and how we're enacting our faith, because now is the time where the rubber meets the road. Like, now should be the time where. Which I'm not saying it's not happening. Like, I hope I'm not poo-pooing on things here. I'm being Debbie Downer, but because there are some really good things that are happening, but also some things that are not good that are happening in the life of our country, and that I think the church is not speaking to for a myriad of reasons. So no, I don't think God's being removed from our country, because I don't think God can ever do that, because we're not. As much as we'd like to say, that we don't have that hubris to do that. God can do whatever God wants.
Let me jump in here.
Yeah, please, because I am treading water.
Yeah, no,
I was like, for the love of everything, I'll put the whole, just say something.
Let the guy who's not working on a doctorate talk for a second.
Yeah.
Then Kendall can fix everything.
Yeah, you fix everything.
Everybody loves Kendall. So, the idea, with me, let me approach this from a very personal thing right here. Just my participation on anything social and internet is I will share our stream on Sundays.
Yeah.
And I will tell people happy birthday.
Yeah.
That's it. That's it. I'm looking at funny dog memes. I'm seeing how.
Wait, don't you share Theology on Tap, Oil Horse thing?
Yeah. That's part of church. Yeah. So anyway, that's what I've limited myself to. I'm liking, pictures of kids and all that kind of stuff. Hyperbolic statements about civil structures. No, not even about that at all. Not that I did a lot before, but I think particularly there's this idea of things are so charged right now, and no one on either side of the political spectrum, and there's no one living in the middle anymore. And it's just this idea. It's I just don't want any part of that. I am going to retreat to the circle that I have been charged with. And so I'm going to text someone. I'm going to call someone. I'm going to see about particular needs that I can like actually personally affect. I'm going to say, how are you doing and how can I help? Like there is, and I'm not the only one that's doing that. Like there's this beautiful thing within like Christianity. I think especially within like, you know, churches who have like a strong, when I say congregational base, I'm not talking about attendance. I'm talking about like an identity that's rooted in Christ, and people are about that together. So there's like this growing sense of like of participation and oneness and like Christocentric view of things. I'm going to care about the least, the last, and the lost, and I'm going to, you know, take other people with me. And something we say often is like, go do something good and take a friend with you. And there's this mindset that people are tired of all the stuff out there, right, and want to be a part of something better. And the church is kind of helping facilitate some of that. There's like there's this beautiful banner that represents a kingdom that's bigger than like terrestrial borders. That someone's like, I'm going to do this. And this will be beautiful. And we can disagree in November, but we're going to agree on this thing right here because it's bigger than ourselves. That's a special thing. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing some people grab a hold of that. Sure. Not everyone does, but some people are, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think that if we're looking at things that have been revealed through COVID, I think that there is a lot about our true natures that has been revealed during COVID, sure, as it is during any sort of national or global emergency. One of the things that I have seen that I guess is always there, and I just maybe didn't notice it as much, is it's really interesting that people tend to find out that God always agrees with them, you know? And I'm like, yeah, I know. Like whatever a certain person's point of view is, it's God's point of view too. And whenever God always agrees with you, mm-hmm, there's something wrong. Like God doesn't always agree with us. Right. And you know, being a Presbyterian, knowing that we are just
like Mr. Rogers,
right? Knowing that we are sinful beings. Although he was really happy for a Presbyterian, I gotta tell you. Knowing that we are sinful beings. If God always agrees with us, that cannot be
in redemption.
Yes, really big redemption guy. So like, it just can't happen. So like, if we're constantly hearing people who are touting how God is supporting their position, then that's not real. Yeah. You know, it just can't be, because it's like when we started this Theology on Tap stuff, we were trying to figure out how it was going to work out, and I think it was Jack who said, like, I know what I believe, but I'm really interested in what you believe too. Right. You know. So like there's God's a lot bigger. Like I think there was a book written a long time ago, like your God is too small or something like that. Oh, so is that really a book? And I just make that up? Okay,
no, it's called Your God's Too Small.
Your God is too small, yeah. So like God is so much bigger than we want God to be sometimes, because it makes us incredibly uncomfortable. Yeah. When we find out that God might challenge us or disagree with us or tell us what we're doing is wrong. Oh my gosh. Right. Couldn't have that. But I think that's one thing that COVID has revealed to us is like it's revealed people's true identities to a certain degree. Right. And I think that the best thing is when we've seen the true identities, like what you were talking about, Mike, when you've seen the church do good things. Right. And I think we've all seen that. And that's, you know, again, I hate to be the optimistic person, but like,
you really did.
I know.
You got it.
I know. I do hate to be the optimistic.
Why was I the negative one tonight?
I don't know. Why are you the negative one? Suddenly you become a doctor and you're negative all of a sudden. Oh, Dr. Downer. Dr. Downer. That's it. That's his new name. It's not it's Dr. Downer.
On that note, thank you so much for being a part of Theology on Tap tonight. That's the end of our show.
Yep.
That's it, right?
Yep, I think so. Thank y'all. We will do this again first Tuesday.
We'll be back here first Tuesday of the month, every month, right here in the tap room.
Yep.
And we don't have a topic picked for next week, so if you would like to submit an idea for us to consider on the pastoral panel, actually a great way to do that, maybe on drop it in the comments on the stream if you're watching online, or hand us a note card here in person, or tell Kendall. Thanks everyone. We love you. Bye.
Good night, everybody.